Welcome back to Sexpertise, where we're keeping marriages exciting and single people safe, one empowering conversation at a time. Tonight's episode is called The Clit is Lit. You like that? But we're turning the spotlight on one of the most misunderstood yet most important organs in sexual anatomy, and that is the clitoris. This isn't just a little button, it's an entire internal structure with a huge impact on arousal and orgasm. And we're going to break it all down tonight. So, why are we talking about this? Well, because understanding the body leads to better intimacy, better communication, and less shame. Pleasure anatomy is rarely taught in traditional sex education, and most of us have had to fumble through learning about it ourselves. I'm sure many of you can relate. But when we understand how the clitoris works and why it's so often neglected, we begin to rewrite the story around sexual empowerment and pleasure equity. So tonight we'll be using my second demonstration pillow, the one that shows the full internal clitoral anatomy, to show how this organ really works. We'll bust some myths, explore its structure, and talk about why external stimulation is essential for most people with vulvas. You might remember this vulva from last week. So get comfy, get your tea or wine. For me, it's usually always water. But grab your favorite beverage and let's illuminate what should have been taught to us all along. All right, so let's start with a bold truth. The clitoris is the only organ in the entire human body whose sole purpose is pleasure. It's not for reproduction, and it doesn't assist with urination. It exists purely to feel good. That fact alone is revolutionary, especially in a world that often deprioritizes or pathologizes female pleasure. And yet, this organ with no other job but joy has been left out of a ton of anatomy books. So, the clitoral glands, the little nub that you can actually see on this pillow from last week, it would be that little red gem there. If I look down, it's because I am making sure you can see it on camera. So, this little nub that you can see contains over 8,000 nerve endings, which is more than double the number found in the head of a penis. And those nerve endings connect directly to the brain through a complex web of pathways, meaning clitoral stimulation can produce intense, full body pleasure. And yet, most of us grew up never hearing about this. Imagine what that kind of silence does to our sense of worth and embodiment. What's even more surprising is that the clitoris is mostly internal, hence my little pillow here. The part that we see is just the tip of the iceberg. Inside the body is a vast erectile structure that surrounds the vaginal opening and becomes fully engaged during arousal. So we're going to explore more of this in the next few slides, and by the end of the episode, you'll see why knowing your full anatomy is not only powerful, but it's essential. So let's talk about the external clit. All right, we'll talk about the part of the clitoris that we can see, and that is the glands. So this is the tiny pea-sized bump located at the top of the vulva, just above the urethral opening. So if you remember our anatomy lesson from last week, this is the vulva, here's the urethral opening, and that there is the glands. So that's the part of the clitoris that you can see. Now, it does vary in shape and size from person to person, but it's always packed with sensory nerve endings. For many, And I'm going to apologize again for the sniffles. I don't think it's going to go away. So in the next or in future episodes, I probably just won't mention it anymore, and it'll just be part of my thing. But anyways, for many, this little nub, this glans, is the most sensitive external point on the body, which is why even gentle touch can feel incredibly intense. Covering the glans is the clitoral hood, a thin fold of skin that protects it. Some hoods retract slightly during arousal, so going back a little bit, exposing more of the glands, while others remained more covered. This variation is totally normal. The hood serves as an important purpose as it protects the clitoris from friction or overstimulation, much like an eyelid protects the eye. But it also means that stimulation techniques need to be personalized. Not everyone enjoys direct contact. It's important to remember that while the glans is small, it's not insignificant. In fact, it's often the only part of the clitoris many people know exists. So everyone knows that this exists. That's why this episode matters. When we reduce the clitoral pleasure to just the tip, we ignore an entire network of pleasure beneath the surface. So tonight we're going beyond that, and in doing so, we're going to reclaim a further understanding of the body's potential. All right, so now we're going deeper, literally. Beneath the visible glans lies the clitoral shaft, a cylindrical structure that runs backward into the body. So this here, let's just pretend that it's basically here like this. I mean, it's obviously enlarged for demonstration purposes, but where you see the glans, which is that red part there, that red gem represents that. That's going to be the tip of this structure. So pretend that that is internal behind the vulva there. So the part that's the clitoral shaft is this here. So we have the visible glans, and then lies the clitoral shaft, a cylindrical structure that runs backward into the body. From there, the clitoris branches out into two crura. I'm going to have to make sure I'm pronouncing that right. Like I mentioned in the last episode, I'm teaching the correct terminology, but how we pronounce things is a little different from person to person. But anyway, so those are going to be the legs that wrap around the vaginal canal. So if you remember from last week, this is our vaginal canal back here. So clitoris, the glans, and then our vaginal canal starts here. So if this is back here, these legs here are going to wrap around the vaginal canal, and then we have our two vestibular bulbs that sit just beneath the labia. So these two are going to sit just beneath the labia. So you have our outer and inner labia here. All right, so these sit back there, and all together, this basically creates a wishbone-shaped organ made entirely of erectile tissue, and it all plays a role in sexual sensation. All right, so during arousal, blood flow increases, and these structures swell, just like the penis. The bulbs become engorged, these legs here become firm, and the entire structure presses against surrounding tissue, including the walls of the vagina. All right. So this is why internal stimulation often feels more pleasurable when the clitoris is already aroused. All right. Internal stimulation often feels more pleasurable when the clitoris is already aroused. Not because penetration alone does the trick, but because the internal clitoris is already activated. So using the second pillow model, you'll see how these parts are positioned. The vaginal opening is literally surrounded by this tissue. This is why clitoral engagement is crucial during any sexual activity, whether solo or partnered. When we understand that stimulation isn't just about the external glands, we expand our pleasure map and empower ourselves to explore more deeply with more satisfaction and less confusion. Now, here's something many people don't know. The clitoris and the penis start from the same exact tissue in the womb. Same tissue. In early fetal development, all genitals begin the same way. Around weeks 8 through 12, hormones guide that tissue to become a penis or a clitoris. That's why the two share so many it's because I can't breathe, you guys. The two share so many structural similarities. The erectile tissue, a glans, and a shaft, but are organized differently and serve different biological roles. Just like the penis, the clitoris responds to sexual arousal by filling with blood. The glands becomes more sensitive, the internal structures enlarge, and yes, the clitoris experiences an erection. You may not always see it, but you can often feel the difference in sensitivity and fullness. This is why taking time for arousal is essential, and the clitoris is not ready at the drop of a hat. It needs time, attention, and stimulation to fully engage. When we skip arousal, when we skip activation, the clitoris doesn't just switch on like a light. It has to gradually build up sensation as the tissue swells. This is one reason why quick and rough penetration can sometimes feel uncomfortable or unsatisfying. The body simply isn't fully prepared. But when we honor this tissue, allow blood flow, and engage all parts of the clitoral network, we create a much more pleasurable and connected experience. All right, so the clitoral hood may seem small or insignificant, but it plays a critical role in sexual pleasure. This fold of skin sits just above the glands and functions like a protective cover, much like foreskin does for the penis. It helps shield the sensitive tip of the clitoris from constant friction, especially during everyday movement or when arousal isn't present. That protection is part of what allows the glands to remain so sensitive. During arousal, the hood can retract slightly, either naturally or with a gentle touch, revealing more of the glands underneath. But not everyone's hood behaves the same way, and that's completely normal. Some people have hoods that fully cover the glands, where in this demo, that's pretty much how this one is designed. It's fully covering the glands all the time, while others may notice more exposure during stimulation. Now, there's no right or wrong anatomy here, only your anatomy. And learning how your hood moves can help you understand what kind of stimulation feels good or too intense. Many people benefit from indirect clitoral stimulation, meaning the hood remains at least partially in place while being touched. This diffuses sensation and avoids overwhelming the nerve endings. Think of it as a dimmer switch. Stimulating through the hood can create a more gradual and controllable buildup of pleasure, and learning to work with the hood, not against it, is a key part of responsive, intuitive touch. One of the biggest myths in sexual health is the vaginal penetration alone being being enough to bring someone to orgasm. That's that's not true. In reality, around 75% of people with vulvas do not reach orgasm from penetration alone. And that's not because there's something wrong with them. It's because the clitoris, not the vagina, is the primary source of orgasmic sensation for most. All right. So the clitoral stimulation is going to be the primary source of orgasmic sensation, not the vagina. All right. And if the clitoris isn't being directly or indirectly stimulated, orgasm becomes much less likely. Now, why does this myth persist? Because traditional sex education and mainstream porn often centers male pleasure. The idea, you like the roll of the eyes? The idea that intercourse equals climax is rooted in heteronormative, penis-focused thinking. But real life bodies don't always follow that script. Most people need additional stimulation, often from the outside. Hands, toys, oral, or even targeted pressure to truly reach peak pleasure. And that's not extra work, it's just good anatomy awareness. When partners understand this, everything changes. It stops being about finishing and starts being about feeling. You don't need to fit into someone else's formula to be valid. Your body's needs are not complicated. They're just not always catered to in the scripts that we've inherited. Centering the clitoris in sexual encounters is not selfish. It's scientifically accurate and deeply affirming. Let's throw out the idea that the clitoris is one spot and that it works like a button. In reality, clitoral sensation spans multiple zones, and different areas may respond in different ways. The glands, the shaft, the crura, the legs, and the bulbs all contribute to arousal and orgasm. Sorry, getting a tissue. Let me repeat that here in a second. When is it going to end? All right, so the glands, the shaft, the crura, and the bulbs can all contribute to arousal and orgasm, but not always in the same way or intensity. This is why clitoral mapping and exploring these zones through touch can be a powerful way to deepen body literacy. Some people might find the glands too sensitive, while others crave direct pressure. All right, so the shaft may respond well to stroking or circular motions, and the bulbs, though harder to isolate, can be stimulated through the vaginal walls or surrounding tissue. So using your fingers, a toy, or even a partner's help, you can learn how to access these different zones and tune into what your body likes. This is not extra. This is the foundation of personalized pleasure. All right. And so I did that because that is where the bulbs would be. So much of clitoral education has been reduced to one method, one move, one technique. But your pleasure map is as unique as your fingerprint. When you take time to explore your own anatomy without pressure or performance, you begin building a real relationship with your body. Clitoral mapping isn't just about sex, it's about agency, curiosity, and reclaiming the full range of your sensuality. Let's tackle a few common myths. First, the idea that vaginal orgasms are somehow superior or more mature than clitoral ones. This comes from outdated Freudian thinking, and it's completely false. All orgasms involve the clitoris, whether directly or indirectly. When someone has an orgasm during penetration, it's often because their internal clitoris or the outer glans is being stimulated in tandem. It's not a separate system, it's the same powerhouse. Another myth? That clitoral stimulation takes too long or is too complicated. That narrative only exists because the sexual script has been written by and for people who are used to fast arousal and minimal foreplay. The truth is, the clitoris responds best to time, rhythm, and variety. That's not a flaw, that's just how the body works. When you view pleasure as a journey instead of a race, you start to see time as a gift, not a burden. Finally, pleasure isn't a one size fits all type of thing. What works for one person may feel totally off for another. And honestly, that's okay. It doesn't mean you're broken or that you're hard to please. It just means your wiring is totally different. When we bust these myths, we create room for honest conversation, mutual learning, and more satisfying experiences, both alone and with partners. All right, communication is lubrication. Before I get into this segment, so next month, August, will be 1 year since this televised program launched. And we don't have Sexpertise merch. But I know I talk about communication pretty much in every episode, whether we are talking about sex, anatomy, relationships, attachment theory, whether we're interviewing other guests. I always talk about communication. And when I built this slideshow for tonight's episode, I was like, dude, a shirt that says communication is lubrication? Let me know what you think about this. All right. I usually never get sidetracked, but I got sidetracked as soon as I pulled that up. So, even though this is televised, it does get published onto social media platforms. So if you're watching this on Facebook right now, please let me know what you think in the comments. Same with YouTube. Let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to hear if you would purchase merch with communication is lubrication as the main theme. Anyway, so let's get into communication. This is a truth that applies to everybody and every relationship. Communication is lubrication. The more we talk openly about what we like, what we need, and what feels good, the smoother and more satisfying intimacy becomes. But because clitoral pleasure is still so stigmatized and misunderstood, many people struggle to even bring it up. That silence can lead to frustration, disconnection, or just going through the motions. Start with small, curious questions. What kind of pressure feels best? Do you like circles? Do you like strokes? Do you like tapping? Or do you like vibration? Would you rather explore solo first or try something new together? The goal isn't to give a full anatomy lecture in bed. Yeah, like don't do what I'm doing in bed, okay? That's not what I mean. It's instead asking those questions that'll create space for curiosity without shame. You're not difficult for having preferences. You're empowered for knowing what works for you and being willing to share it. The more that the more that you normalize these conversations outside of the bedroom, over tea, during a walk, or even with yourself in a journal, the easier it's going to become. Communication opens the door to intimacy that's authentic and responsive and deeply pleasurable. And for those of us whose pleasure has often been sidelined or misunderstood, reclaiming that conversation is an act of self respect and care. All right, let's talk about tools. And no, I don't have any tools with me for this episode other than my pillows. But let's talk about this. So, pleasure doesn't need to rely on friction alone. I'm sorry, ADD moment. Yeah, if I had tools with me, this would turn into a whole nother show, and I'd rather not get canceled 1 year into my programming. But anyways, whether it's your fingertip, your partner's mouth, or your favorite toy, there are many ways to access and enjoy clitoral stimulation. Vibrators are often the most popular because they offer consistent pressure and intensity, which can be helpful for people who take longer to warm up or want to bypass hand fatigue. But fingers are incredibly versatile too, especially when you or a partner learn to pay attention to rhythm and feedback. Oral sex is another option that offers more than just sensation. It's intimate, it's vulnerable, and it's full of nuance. The warmth, the moisture, and the connection it can bring often enhances arousal on multiple levels. But remember, there's no right or wrong way to enjoy stimulation. Some folks find oral too intense and prefer external vibration. Others may like switching it up depending on their mood, their cycle, or stress levels. Pleasure can and should evolve with you. There's no shame in using help. The idea that toys or techniques are cheating comes from a narrow and often male centered view of sex. Your pleasure isn't a test that you pass or fail, it's a personal journey. Using tools simply means you're invested in your body's well being and taking the time to learn what supports your experience the best. Pleasure is personal, and what works for you is always going to be valid. All right. Now, the clitoris doesn't retire. And if you notice, I forgot to change my image from a peach to something that looks like a clitoris. But enjoy the peach reference. That was from us discussing anal play last week. But anyhow, the clitoris doesn't retire. All right. And I want to go over this because so many of my clients have come to speak with me because they feel like their clit is broken or it just doesn't work. And it's because I'm old, or, people who are aging often think that their clitoris is like one day just not going to function. No. While your experience of pleasure might shift with age, hormonal changes, pregnancy, or health conditions, the anatomy is still there and still capable of incredible sensation. In fact, the clitoris continues to grow across the lifespan and often becomes more prominent with age. That's right. Older doesn't mean less. It can actually mean more access to sensation when supported with intentional care. Life events like childbirth or menopause may affect arousal patterns or tissue sensitivity, but that doesn't mean that pleasure has to disappear. With lubrication, patience, and attention to your evolving needs, clitoral play can remain not only possible, but deeply fulfilling. Some people even discover more fulfilling pleasure in midlife or later because they finally feel free from shame or pressure and more in tune with their bodies. I'm sure there are few of you vulva owners who are listening to this or watching this, and you can relate to that statement about, actually, how sometimes they say that women are in their prime as they get older, like 30s, 40s, so on. This is why, when you feel free from shame or pressure and you know what it is that you want, that pleasure is going to be that much greater. So let's normalize pleasure as a lifelong right, okay? Lifelong, not a youthful indulgence. There's no expiration date on your desire or your capacity to enjoy. Whether you're 25 or 75, the clitoris is still wired for joy. That's literally its only job. So by honoring the seasons of your body, you can create a relationship with pleasure that adapts, expands, and deepens no matter where you are in your journey. All right, so it's time for more visuals. So this is the perfect moment for me to bring out the internal clitoris model, which was the second pillow. With this guide, we can clearly see what often gets overlooked in anatomy books and mainstream media, that the clitoris is more than just the tip. So I'll walk you through each part again so you can understand how it works as a whole system and not just a single spot. Now, you start with the glans. This is our visible tip. That's the part most people recognize. Then there's the shaft, which extends underneath the hood. All right, so this is the clitoris here. Here's your hood. This is behind that. All right, so it extends underneath the hood and connects to the internal structure right here. From there, you're going to see the crura, or the legs, that run down and back along the pubic bone. Finally, the bulbs located along each side of the vaginal opening. So we have the vaginal opening here, just as a visual. Now imagine this behind that. All right. So these bulbs are located along each side of the vaginal opening and are responsible for that full engorged sensation during arousal. These parts all work together, and when blood flows to the entire structure, that's what amplifies sensation and orgasm potential. So, holding a pillow like this, and this is called the Devondra pillow, but you can pretty much Google a pillow like this if you want something to have that's tangible. And the reason why I would suggest it is because holding this pillow in your hands helps to take away the mystery and makes the anatomy real. Okay, we can't physically see the internal clitoris. All right, so this makes it tangible and empowering. When we can see it, touch it, name it, we de-shame it. This isn't just about sex, it's about embodiment. So knowing your flower, which is what we referred to it last week, every petal and pathway is one of the most radical forms of self-love that you can practice. Now, pleasure is not a luxury, and it's not a reward. It's not something, it's not something that you have to earn. Pleasure is a birthright, a core part of your human experience. And yet so many people grow up without the language, the education, or the support to even explore their own pleasure without some kind of guilt. And that's not only sad, it's a disservice to your health, your confidence, and connection with yourself and others. So shame-free education is how we begin to reclaim that birthright. When we learn the science behind our anatomy and see how wonderfully we're wired for joy, we begin to shift the script. We realize we're not broken, we're not difficult, we're just being underinformed. Every time we say the word clitoris without cringing, every time we correct a myth or help a partner understand our body, we're doing healing work. Not just for ourselves, but for our communities. I've had a lot of people, this is probably something that I get the most feedback on, is how well spoken I am. I mean, sometimes it comes disguised as like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you can comfortably say that on TV or comfortably say that during a speaking engagement on stage in front of hundreds of people or whatever the case may be. People say I'm too comfortable, that I sound very comfortable. And for those of you watching now, you're probably thinking like, oh my gosh, she said penis and clitoris and lubrication. Every time I continue to talk about this, like I take that feedback as a compliment because I don't cringe. It's not uncomfortable for me at all. But the only way I can get other people to be comfortable is if they are listening, if they are included in this conversation. This way you can feel comfortable doing the same. So this episode, like every one that I've done, is about returning to yourself. Not a version edited by shame or expectation, but your full, brilliant, pleasure-powered self. Knowledge is power, and in the case of sexual health, it's power with softness, confidence, and deep personal truth. All right, so as we close out, these allergies are awful. I've talked about it now for 6 weeks in a row. 6 weeks. Florida, why? What? Your pollen is poison to me. And it could also be because I own 3 cats, but that is not to be discussed on this show. But as we close out tonight's episode, I invite you to reflect. What's one thing you learned about your body or your pleasure that felt new, affirming, or surprising? Maybe it was the full internal clitoral structure. Maybe it was realizing that pleasure can and should change over time. Or maybe it was the simple validation that your body is normal, your desires are valid, and your exploration is beautiful. Now, what's one thing you're curious to try? It could be experimenting with different types of stimulation, bringing up a new conversation with your partner, or even just journaling about your experience of pleasure. Curiosity is where confidence begins. You don't have to know it all. You just have to stay open. So I want to hear, like, honestly, those are your reflection questions, but I want to hear about it. My email is sexpertise@e360tvlive.com. Please, I would love for you to send your stories. They are always confidential, unless, of course, you give me permission to include it in promotion in some way. But other than that, next week, we're going to dig even deeper with the last segment of this 3-week series. Next week, that episode is called Inside Out: Arousal, Orgasms, and the Sexual Response Cycle, where we'll explore what happens inside the body during turn-ons, how desire works, and what most sex ed never taught us about the orgasm process. Until then, take care of yourself and your pleasure. You're worth knowing, you're worth feeling, and you are absolutely worth celebrating. Don't forget to check me out on all socials at the Erica Rivera, and make sure to subscribe to Patreon for some behind the scenes content and our intimacy tip sheets that go out after every episode.